This episode is the first of two dedicated to Yoko Ono's exhibition, Music of the Mind at Tate Modern. By the way, this exhibition is organised by Tate Modern in London in collaboration with Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfallen in Düsseldorf. So, we decided to extend our usual time allocated to exhibitions, which is one episode, because Yoko Ono is one of the most overlooked and yet pivotal artists of the second half of the 20th century. Personally, I find that she helps us understand conceptualism, a type of art we sort of lost contact with and remain oblivious to in many ways, because she's not enamored with it. She uses it for connectivity and togetherness. She understands its time-based nature, or rather she helped create it, because she wanted so to be a concert pianist or a composer, but ultimately she became Yoko Ono, one of the first women to navigate male spaces in contemporary art and music. She is a woman of firsts, and the first thing she was confronted with was constantly being an outsider. Her family was Catholic, but incredibly interested in classical Japanese art, while also dedicating a lot of time to jazz, her father, and painting. Her mother and her aunt Anna Bubnova and her sister Varvara Bubnova, who introduced constructivism in Japan. They came straight from Russia. She was the first woman to enroll in a philosophy course in Japan, and she was the first person to publish a book of instruction art, Grapefruit, in 1964. This was before Solowit would produce his first wall drawing at Paula Cooper Gallery in 1968, and thus embark on an instruction-based form of drawing in relation with architecture. My point here is that it doesn't really matter who did what first, but it is important not to obliterate the role female, but also queer, native or non-binary artists played. For instance, personally, I knew of Grapefruit much later than I knew of Lawrence Winner, Joseph Cassutt and Sol LeWitt's writing about conceptual art. I was astounded by the poetic quality and impossibility of some of the instructions, and had to revise my idea of instruction art, when in fact her instructions were connected with the notion of musical schools and poetry. It also allowed me to understand one of the statements by Sol LeWitt, saying that, quote, "Conceptual artists are mystics rather than rationalists. They leap to conclusions that logic cannot reach. Rational judgments repeat rational judgments. Irrational judgments lead to new experience." So these were the three first sentences of his Sentences of Conceptual Art, published in 1969. King Lear says it, nothing comes from nothing, and art feeds off of other art in a complex way that is irreducible to the sterile notion of influence. We create together. And we create in our time, and we also resonate with other former times, and perhaps even with the future. So in this episode, we start by chatting about Yoko Ono's persona, what is said about her and the difficulties she faced as a Japanese woman in the States after Pearl Harbor, but also as a US-based avant-garde artist going back in the 60s to an experimental and high-achieving Japanese art scene. Yoko Ono's two first instruction pieces are mentioned, and it is exciting to see how music-driven they were while simultaneously creating a sort of happening or performance right at the beginning of the 1950s. We stopped more or less in 1962, so much is left to say about Yoko Ono's career as an artist and the exhibition itself in our second episode. So let's not waste any more time. Without further ado, let's dig in. Enjoy. Hello and welcome again to our humble podcast about artists seen through their exhibitions. with me, Joanna Piar Neves, and my lovely co hosts. We are devoted to this format of the exhibition because it allows for an experience you literally cannot have anywhere else. It can be uncomfortable, emotional, rigorous, chaotic, powerful, and I think the exhibition we are about to explore is a very good example of it. But it will always be challenging, good challenging. That's why we have to talk about these exhibitions for you, our listener, to go on a journey with us where we will not shy away from questions, both very dumb and hopefully a bit deep as well, comments and anecdotes.
And I am said lovely co-host, Emily Harding. Thanks for that, Joanna. An art lover and an exhibition goer. And it's true, exhibitions are that once in a lifetime kind of moment, and they're different every time you go, even if you're going to the same one. So it's a really great way to experience art and have a great chat about it. But first, what was your week in culture like, Joanna?
Well, as you know, my week was culture. So this was my big week of the year where we opened and closed the Drawing Now Art Fair week. So I am the artistic director of Drawing Now Art Fair. And so we had lots of artists, galleries, talks, two exhibitions, and it was absolutely delightful. The week has been about drawing, which was absolutely fantastic. We had the exhibition of Suzanne Husky. So Suzanne won the prize, the Drawing Now Art Fair prize
Mm.
last year. So one of the great advantages of that prize is that you get an exhibition at the Drawing Lab the year after during the fair. So I visited her exhibition and it was absolutely lovely. It was a sort of scientific style drawing, an exploration or a comment on the scientific drawing. And she dedicated the exhibition to beavers and their impact on the ecosystem, but
Oh,
also the impacts of agriculture on their ecosystem. So that was
yeah, interesting.
incredibly powerful. Yeah, very interesting. I learned a lot. So from the 12th century onward, we basically destroyed the ecosystem that the beavers were building because they create forests around them and they also have an impact on the water. And so they kind of create these very damp, moist ecosystems and then everything grows around them. And from
Yeah.
the 12th century onward, we completely destroyed that.
I mean, in the UK, they're starting to reintroduce them actually into the wild.
Ealing, here where I live. Yeah, they just reintroduced beavers, and I love beavers. I was so excited when everyone sent me the post on Instagram because it's just thank you, Suzanne Husky was incredible. Or Suzanne Husky without the accent was incredible. She's a French artist. To see that exhibition was really lovely, and then I'm also excited to say that we unveiled the winner of the prize this year,
Mm.
and it's the Polish artist Tatiana Wolska. So I'm very happy about that. But I have to say that this year we had a great lineup of only women, so 5 women, including a cartoonist, Catherine Meurice, who is the only survivor of the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. I don't know if you
Oh,
remember that. She
wow.
was late.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah, and
god.
when she arrived there, everything was cordoned off, and they were there, and yeah, it was
Wow.
quite a big thing for her. But she is an incredible artist in her own terms. There was also a great friend who's a terrific artist, Marine Pages. I mean, anyone could have won the prize, to be very honest. Prizes are strange. And I also finally was so delighted to work with Inci Eviner, who's this great Turkish artist. Had a solo show at the Maison de la Culture d'Amiens through our partnership with the FRAC Picardie, which is the only collection in the FRAC, which are regional art funds in every region of France that is dedicated to contemporary drawing. And through this
Wow.
partnership, we did an exhibition there. And Inji is an incredible artist. She's in her 60s and she has an amazing journey into art. And she represented Turkey at the 2019 Venice Biennial. It was an honor to work with her. It was so impactful. It was really, really fantastic. So, yeah, my week was culture. It was very, very tiring. By the way, I have to say, for our listeners' sake, because they're probably thinking, something changed about their voices, and
Yeah.
we are ill, you and I. We're
Yeah.
very sick. After drawing
All
now,
at
I always
home.
get sick, but this time
Yeah.
it's been quite a week. And for you
That
too, Emily.
no, oh my gosh, yeah, totally. Which is why my week in culture has been television. But, before before we do that, I mean, so if people are interested in drawing now, how do they find out more about drawing now?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. So we have a website. So bear in mind, it is an art fair. So it is like any other art fair, like Frieze, but it is specifically about drawing in an expanded sense. You can find ceramics, you can find videos, animations, also drawings on paper. So we are an event, a yearly event, always the last week of March every year in Paris at the Carreau du Temple. And we also do roundtables. We always curate one exhibition at least one in the space of the Carreau du Temple. And it's an opportunity to travel worldwide while being in a very small space with 73 galleries from all over the world, who are presenting what their artists do best and like cutting edge contemporary drawing. So that's where you can find us at the Carreau du Temple, or explore our website. We have a YouTube channel as well, Drawing Now Art Fair, where you have all the talks we've done since the beginning, artist interviews. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it is really cool, and, I mean, are there that many forums that focus on drawing?
Well, not really. To be very fair, the first ever drawing art fair was the Salon du Dessin, which happens at the same time as us. And they've existed for 50 years, I think, so a long, long time. But they focus on old masters and until modernism. So
Okay.
we are the only art fair that really is dedicated to contemporary drawing. And then after us, so we've existed for 17 years. I've been working as an artistic director there since 2018, and now there are other art fairs dedicated to drawing, like Art on Paper in Brussels, Paper Positions in Germany and Switzerland. There are other art fairs. We are the bigger. Sorry, this is really.
Go
We
on.
are. I mean,
Go
it's.
on.
I am going to put it out there. We are the biggest. We are a human sized art fair because we only have about 73 galleries. Art Brussels, which is in a few weeks, has 175 galleries. So we're quite
Okay.
small, but big enough for people to spend 3 days with us. Like people, where I think we're one of the only art fairs where people come and go, and they come on the first day, they come on the second day, then they come during the weekend with some friends. It really is a meeting point because it is dedicated to a medium.
Yeah, amazing. Brilliant. Wow,
I
well,
feel like I
congratulations.
was interviewed quite a lot the last week and the weeks before. I feel like I'm doing the final interview for Right
That's
Now Art
it.
Fair. But
That's it.
thank you, Emily, for letting me plug my my art fair.
Yeah, totally. No, it's so impressive, and yeah, I mean, I haven't been, but one day, Joanna, one day I shall make it across
Emily,
the
in
channel.
2025, we'll hook you up.
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, so my week in culture.
So
Have you
what
ever
did you
seen
do?
Laid on the
What did
sofa
you do?
and did a whole lot of
Same.
nothing? I coughed, I sneezed, I blew my
You
nose a
blew your
lot.
nose.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
a
then
lot.
had to
Yeah.
put, like, chapstick on my nose because it was so worn down from all of it.
Oh,
Poor thing, I
I'm not
know.
there yet. I'm not there yet. I'll get there.
So, the Kleenex with the aloe, that's the way to go.
Oh, sponsor
That's my
us,
top tip.
please.
Yeah, exactly. Kleenex with balsam. They're just tender on the nose and just exactly what you need
Yeah.
when you have a cold. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And you won't need chapstick after a while.
I mean, I still did, I gotta say. I still did have to put a little dab on there. But,
Now. There goes the sponsoring.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so I laid around on the sofa and watched a lot of television. Atlanta, have you seen Atlanta?
I have not, and I love Donald Glover, so I need
How can you
to
not
get on
how
it.
could you not love Donald Glover? So, yeah, so Atlanta is the one that he did before that. I don't know, there's 4 seasons of it, and I don't know if they're making any
Wow,
more.
really?
It might be done. It
What's
is
it about?
it's unlike that's the thing, Joanna, is it's tough to say what it's about. So, it's not plot
Okay,
driven.
now I'm curious.
In the first
Really?
episode, it's about a rapper
Ooh, that's
in
for me then.
Atlanta. It's about a rapper in Atlanta broadly and his crew,
Uh-huh.
kind of his family and friends, and I mean, that's the very broad context for it. In the first episode, there's a shooting and you think, "Oh, wow, it's gonna" like, the shooting is never talked about again. Like, it is not about that. It's like right in the first episode, it's like, "We're gonna do this, and you're gonna think it's gonna like, the consequences of this big event that
Oh,
happens in the first season is gonna be what this is about." Guess what? It's not, you know? So, it's not plot driven. There aren't, like, huge character arcs. There's some. People progress and things happen and choices are made, but it's not about that. Even the main cast doesn't appear in every episode. There are episodes that have
really?
nothing to do with the main characters, but it still works. So it's about a lot of things, but race is a central feature. It's a show that, for me, I just didn't feel like it was trying to convince me of anything about race.
Mm,
It wasn't trying to
mm,
moralize about race, although it certainly, would have license to, for sure. But it's just
hmm.
like presenting realities and ideas that welcomes a viewer in to be like, huh, right. It's unapologetically what it is almost makes it feel like it is something that's trying to do something to you, but it does it in such a light way. Like it's holding it all so lightly. And if you haven't seen Community, he was an actor on that show. He wasn't a creator and a
Yes,
producer on
yes.
that show, but
Yeah.
that show has a lot of magical realism in there and just absurd tangents of and
I
Atlanta
didn't
has
know
that
that.
too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
parts of it are very real, and kind of in these people's lives, but a lot of it is sort of reality adjacent and kind of
Hmm.
slips things in that way in a very, very clever and
Hmm.
imaginative way. But yeah, it's so good. I mean, you must check it. I'm going to put this on the must list.
It's making me think of Beef. I loved Beef
Oh, I
on
loved
Netflix.
beef.
And the tension, the kind of eroticism of really hating someone is so well explored because they really
Yeah,
hate each other. There's no like, because at a certain point I thought this was going to go in the direction of them finally loving each other. But no,
I
no.
know.
They hate each other from beginning
Yeah.
to end because they're from opposing social drives and
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 it's
and economic drives. And conflict is such a timely thing to be talking about.
cool. So in the vein
Anyway.
of conflict, we could just give peace a chance and
Oh,
introduce
well
was that
done.
a
Good plug.
segue or was that a
That was a
segue?
segue of segues.
Yeah. So, yeah, we could imagine peace and yeah, talk about the exhibition for our listeners.
Yes, we haven't unveiled the name of the artist yet, although it is the name of the episode. So it will come as no surprise that we will be
Yeah.
talking about the Japanese American artist Yoko Ono. She's a person of contrasts. She is very self possessed. I mean, one of the most self possessed women of the
Mm.
50s and 60s.
Brings kind of Hillary Clinton to mind. It's like, someone who has that
Yeah,
self-possession and is hated for it. I mean,
and
but
is hated, absolutely
she
hated for it.
she had that times 10 plus she was Japanese on top of it. So yeah, she's
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah,
Yeah. Totally self-possessed.
yeah. Very self possessed, but also self
Mm.
effacing and not in a submissive way. So the fact that she's self effacing is because for her, there's nothing more important than art. And that's it. It's not the
Mm.
authorship, it's not the artists who are behind the art. art is the most important thing for her. And what's really striking is that in the catalog of the exhibition, which is called Music of the Mind, by the way, is really well done. The catalog's really good. And you can see lots of photographs of her in the exhibition, in the catalog, and she's always opaque. That she
Mm,
has this aura of unpenetrability. You cannot know. She's just standing there for the sake of the art. So it's really tricky to do some research about her and not engage with the personas that were created for her. Because for lots of people, she's the person who broke up the Beatles, which is absolutely not
yeah.
true.
It is totally not true. Yeah. It's so interesting because that is the from an American perspective, I don't know, maybe others as well, it's like, that is the
No, yeah,
overriding,
in the UK. Yeah,
narrative about
absolutely.
her. And, I was talking to a friend of mine who, grew up in the States from when he was 11, but is not from there,
Mm.
and he was like, "Yeah, when I was a kid, I loved the Beatles, and that was what I thought of her, like, boo Yoko Ono, because she broke up the Beatles." And, he's not white, and he's like, and now looking at it, and it's like, "That was so racist," It's like, but I
Oh my
totally didn't
gosh.
see it at the time because I was just, absolutely blinded by the pervasiveness of this theory, and it's just
And
so not
the
true, and it is,
misogyny.
yeah, totally, racism,
It's
misogyny, all of it, and now
she
he's
she
just
got
like
the whole cocktail.
yeah, yeah, and now he's like, "I just can't even believe I, signed up to that,"
You
but
fell for that,
obviously so
yeah.
many people did, yeah.
But that was the culture because alongside that, she's also the most notorious Japanese female celebrity of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. So she was known for being an eccentric in the best case scenario.
Yeah,
Honestly, like this was the best thing you could say about her.
yeah.
Or a vicious hag or a witch. She was called a witch in the press. It's just, this is not things that people would shout at her because they would shout chink, like that's the thing she got in the
Oh,
UK and in America. So not even kind of realizing where exactly she came from. But she was in the press. She was called a witch. Like you
yeah,
can go back. I watched this Joan Rivers episode where she interviewed people who worked with her as assistants, including Amy Peng, who just
yeah,
released a
yeah,
documentary about her week with John Lennon, which was not a weekend, which is not a weekend, what's much more than that. And the way they talk about her, they even talk about the fact that she wanted to eat her own placenta when she had her child, which is something that everybody does now. You freeze your
mm,
placenta, you turn it into pills, and it's apparently really good for your health.
huh,
But that was the witchy thing. Like she was a witch. She wanted to eat her placenta, which is something that now everyone is talking about. And there's like a very big phenomenon of women and even doctors suggesting to just keep the placenta and turn it into pills or, whatever, put it in food. I haven't done that, to be
yeah.
very honest with you, but it is a thing and it's taken
Yeah,
seriously now for many people. But of course,
yeah.
she was a witch because she wanted to, and they were releasing like really private things about her life
Oh,
as if it was a given because she was not a person. She
yeah.
was
She's a
a
witch.
foreigner
Yeah,
and
exactly,
an
and
older woman,
y
so a witch.
yeah, and I the
Up for grabs.
in the exhibition, they have listening booths where you can hear some of her recordings and music. And there was a piece of music that it was a live show, and she was talking before the song began. And she said something to the effect of, when I first got here, I was a bitch. And that's who I was. I was this bitch who broke up the Beatles. And now I've graduated to a witch. And she's like, "So now I have way more power," and
She
she was just
said
having a
that? I didn't
Mickey
get that.
about, yeah, I mean, but there was so many recordings, right? It's like that just happened
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
one that
The
I plugged
exhibition was
into.
full of stuff. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go back anyway, but, it's funny because the other day so my son, my queer son uses the word bitch a lot, which is obviously something that, gay men or bisexual men do. And I keep telling him, that doesn't sit well with me that
Yeah.
much. I don't reclaim that word. I was looking at him. I was like, anyway, we need witches, not bitches. And then my daughter was there and she was like, oh, I'm gonna get that. But actually, Yoko Ono did it first, which I think is something we're gonna say a lot in this
Yeah.
episode. Yoko Ono did it first, and I'm not very tempted by these firstisms of art history, but I think with Yoko Ono, it's so blatant that she was the avant-garde of the avant-garde. But
Yeah.
not only her, also Japanese avant-garde was way more interesting than the American avant-garde in the 60s, in the beginning of the 60s. It
Yeah.
was more at the end of the 60s and beginning of the 70s that things really developed in America. And in Japan, my gosh, so many things were happening. Anyway, I just want to address also this documentary of Amy Peng. So it's out there and it's about an affair that John Lennon had with his assistant at the request of Yoko Ono herself. So it starts like that. So Yoko Ono asks Amy to have a relationship to have an affair with John Lennon because he was straying, he was unbalanced again.
Mm.
And so it starts, and the documentary is about their side of the story while exposing, kind of going back in time and reframing Yoko Ono again as a sort of a witchy creature while John Lennon was finally free and finally having fun. And I, against this documentary, not against, but in confrontation with this or in complement to this documentary, I would suggest listening to an episode of the great, great podcast by Sarah Marshall, You're Wrong About,
Mm.
that really focuses on this idea that Yoko Ono broke the Beatles, but also focuses on John Lennon himself, because we are very guilty of treating John Lennon as a sort of a baby who was constantly manipulated by Yoko Ono, but also perhaps Amy Pang, who knows,
Mm.
and he was a man with agency.
Yeah.
He had a
Isn't it
very
funny?
difficult
It's like the
childhood,
powerful white man is suddenly given no agency and is
no
suddenly
agency
subject
whatsoever.
to the whims and influence of a couple of women. That's turning it on its head.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that episode is really interesting. I think Amy Peng's documentary is very interesting as well. And there's another documentary, which is I think it got the prize here at home as the most boring documentary ever made about the most exciting, interesting, compelling event of the 80s, which is the Apple TV documentary about John Lennon's assassination.
I
It's
watched
the most
about
boring.
10 minutes of that I watched, and
Yeah,
yeah, I was
I
like,
I did more, and
snooze.
you did good.
Yeah.
No, it's snooze fest. It's just, how can you turn something so, crucially important, has such an important phenomenon, into something so boring?
And
Is,
also, it's
I
like
don't know,
something
a
that so
mystery.
many people, like, really care about. Like, there's people who still go
Yes.
to the Dakota and go to the Imagine Memorial in Central Park and all of it.
But since we're talking about John Lennon, one of the things I think that I wanted to highlight is that Yoko Ono was a full blown artist with quite a following when she met him. So she was an artist in her own right. She had a career, which is something that people forget a lot
Yeah,
about her. She was invited to do a show in a very important gallery in London, and that's how she met him. A solo show, by the way, which for a Japanese American artist was quite the achievement. And also, another thing is that when she met John Lennon, I think the question to ask to her as an artist by that point, or from that point onward, is also, I mean, the relationship she had with celebrity as a visual artist. And I feel that she really believed that she could use celebrity to propagate her message.
mm,
And I think she was very naive in her relationship to celebrity. She seems to have been quite naive about it, and not and fall into the caveats of of such a relationship. You know, she felt really ugly. She felt bad in the relationship. Everybody would tell her that she wasn't deserving of such a beautiful man, which in hindsight, you kind of think, beautiful? Really? She's gorgeous.
Yeah.
You look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
John
yeah.
Lennon, you know, yeah, well,
Mm,
okay, maybe
they're
it's
both
something of the
gorgeous.
time,
They're
you
both
know.
gorgeous in
We
their
don't want to
own kind
call
of
anyone ugly. He was also
Yeah.
gorgeous for sure, but I mean, honestly, she was such a
Yeah.
powerful woman, charismatic woman. So I think there's also that aspect that I would love to, if we have time, I'm sure we will, that I'd love to explore with you as well, you know. But anyway, let's go back to the beginnings, you know, to Yoko Ono as a child. You know,
Yeah.
she had a very peculiar upbringing. She was born into a family of wealth and privilege, who lived in a rarefied atmosphere of not only money, but also intellectual endeavors. So her father wanted to be a jazz musician. He was all about music, and her mother was fascinated by her father because of that. Her great grandfather, Atsushi Saisho, was convinced that they had an ancestor, which was a ninth century founder of a radical Buddhist sect that contributed to overthrow the old tradition of feudal military dictatorship, or shoguns, and restored the role of the emperor. And so this ancestor was quite, you know, he was quite engaged in politics, but also had a vision of how to be a Buddhist, how to connect faith to power, etc. So she was growing up in the sort of kind of aspirational setting where it was all about being a virtuoso pianist. It was all about knowing poetry, knowing the classics. It was a family that was very oriented towards art, but they were also very demanding and not very caring as parents. So
Mm.
Yoko Ono, she made me think of Nina Simone, who wanted to be a concert pianist and was always told that, you know, a black woman could never achieve that role. And Yoko Ono wanted to be a concert pianist. So that's what she wanted to do. And her father regularly would check, as she was growing up, would check on her fingers to see if she had the hands of a pianist, and kept
Oh,
telling her, "You're not going to make it. You don't have it."
thanks, Dad.
And when thank you, Father,
Yeah.
and Father dearest. And then when she moved on to think, okay, if I can't be a pianist, maybe I can be a composer. He told her, women cannot be composers. Like, you can't do it. So on one side, she had like a very interesting father who was really into music, was into culture, but at the same time, emotionally, he was completely disconnected from her and had no even the remotest idea of supporting her as an artist. And then her mum criticized her looks and told her
Oh.
repeatedly that she was very lucky to have such a beautiful mom.
Oh.
So, and would never touch her, like would not hug her, like the same
Oh,
Marina Abramovich scenario, where they were
right.
very, very distant. So she had quite a weird upbringing, but she also had a Russian aunt. I forget her
Hmm.
name, Varvara something, who introduced constructivism in Japan.
Wow.
So, you know, she had an incredible family, to be very honest, which is also a very ambivalent relationship to family, isn't it? Where you have a family who kind of feeds you culturally, but then emotionally is completely vacant.
Right.
So that was her life. And, you know, her father was very turned toward the United States. So they went back and forth between the States and Japan. When the war broke with China in 37, they went back. They were in San Francisco. They went back to Tokyo. So they were kind of toing and froing between the United States and Japan until finally the Second World War broke in Japan and they were there, or they went back there. And even though they were wealthy people, they lived a horrible life. They had to flee Tokyo. They went into the countryside. And this is a crucial moment for the artist Yoko Ono, because she remembers lying down in some shack, looking at the sky, and devising menus with her brother because they were so hungry. They had nothing to eat. They
Mm,
were so hungry that they would just dream of menus. And she says, that was my first art piece.
mm.
That was the first time where I knew that through imagination I could get somewhere. And she also realized that no matter what, the sky is always there for you and is always producing images for you and is
Imagine,
always
imagine
imagine.
sushi.
I was going to say,
Hunger is
imagine
over.
all the people eating
Sushi.
sushi.
Oh,
Woohoo! So I have a quote from her. I realized even then that just through imagining, we can be happy. So we had our conceptual dinner, and this is maybe my first piece of art. So
oh.
I think this encapsulates her personality,
And
it
I think,
encapsulates who she is,
yeah, and I
which
think,
is art is everything. In this situation of hunger, and we've explored lots of artists who have gone through that, including Gerhard Richter, last episode. This attitude is a Yoko Ono. Art will
yeah.
save you. You can't eat, but if you imagine art, you can. If you imagine a piece of sushi, you can be happy.
Yeah, and I what I like about that too is, like, even though she was so, had this emotional vacuum that she was growing up with, in her parents. I guess not vacuum, I mean, there were a lot of emotions there, just not warm, caring ones, and what a loving
Yeah,
thing
for
to
sure.
do for her little brother, you know? I mean, she's obviously trying to take him to a better place through a really difficult time. That's really, such an act of love that she's doing for brother, and if that's where her art came from, kind of what she's trying to do with other people and strangers and anyone who encounters her art is to, carry them to a better place. And I think that's one of the things too that really defines her art is that optimism and that turning towards something better and more fruitful for everyone, uh, not just oneself, which is, yeah, a through
That's a
line.
really good point you're making, actually, because she was with her brother. She was caring for someone else. So she was also taking her brother into that journey. And she was not alone when she was creating her first piece, which of course is something that she said afterwards. She realized afterwards. And it is true. And that I think that's one of the things we'll be talking about, that she's one of the few artists who is not representing the world, who is not trying to create a relationship with the world as it is. She's trying to change the world through art. And she's very criticized for it. She's considered to be a bit Pollyannish,
Hmm.
and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And it's actually very much of the time, conceptual art really wanted to put a dent into the real world. It was not about representing, it was about presenting possibilities and opening up horizons. And for
Hmm.
sure, this episode really makes you think of that, and also of how independent she was. So she was very independent. She always had, even when she was still in Japan, she enrolled in a philosophy course, and she had a number of love affairs, including, I think, with one or two professors. So she was always, and I think it's also typical of the time when you were a woman who was independent, who was trying to achieve something in a space where there was male oriented. Obviously, one of the ways to connect to men was through um, love affairs and intimacy, which is absolutely understandable. She was a woman with desires, and I love that about her. And she was
Yeah.
always unapologetic about that.
Totally, and not to, like, psychoanalyze, but it's like if you don't have much intimacy growing up, I imagine that's a pretty, that's a good way to get it, that can feel like a
Yes,
good way to get it.
yeah,
Bless
it's a
her.
proactive way of getting what you need, and I think she's
Mhm.
very good at that. So her family, after this really tough period in Japan, went back to New York, where she studied at Sarah Lawrence. So it's a private liberal arts college that was quite cutting edge, so super experimental, and it was girls only. So she studied English with Catherine Mansell, poetry with Alistair Reid, and she did painting, photography, cinema, performance art, video, and sometimes even mixing genres. And when you think about it, and when you think about art schools now, you kind of think, wow, there was
Mm.
something happening there. And so bear in mind, listeners, we're still in 1953, and she creates her first artwork, which is called Secret Piece. And so it says, decide on one note you want to play. So, still very much connected with music. Play it with the following accompaniment: the woods from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. in summer. So this was 1953. And what is really interesting, and as a curator, I'm always fascinated by where the visual arts, so where artists who produce visual artwork come from. They don't always go to fine art school. And Yoko Ono very much comes from the idea of scores and the idea of poetry and especially an overall music. That was her thing. And
Mm.
it's really interesting to see that she goes into instruction art through the idea of the score. So that was really fascinating.
Mm.
Another thing that I read was the way she was perceived, going back to what I was saying regarding her opacity and the fact that she was not a collective person. She's full of contradictions because she's always concerned with humanity, but then she is a very solitary person and quite mysterious.
Yeah, you can't imagine her sort of joining the sorority on campus. I mean, it's like
No.
that would be the antithesis of her vibe.
Yeah, she has that lonely or
Cat. Yeah,
independent kind of vibe, doesn't she? And
totally.
she's in a girls' school, and she had been before involved in philosophy. So, in the pretty much male oriented world. So, perhaps she wasn't, and also the education she had such a privileged education, the experience of the war and the nuclear bomb when she was 12. I mean, all of that will make for someone arriving in New York and having had 300 lives compared to all the people who were at school with her. So she was described. So Maya Kupferman says she was particularly adept, the best in class. So she is a high achiever. And he recalls evidence of a strong intensity. She was tightly put together and intent on doing well. The other students were more relaxed. She wasn't relaxed, ever.
Hmm.
At the same time, she was a shadow figure on campus. When you focused on her, she was fine, but then she sort of disappeared like a phantom,
Hmm.
which is her. Like,
Yeah,
what a good
that
description.
rings
And you can
true
see how,
somehow. Not
right?
having ever met her, but like that
Yeah, of
feels
course.
exactly right.
She was described as sweet, opaque, ghostly, ethereal, and intelligent by her teachers. She did another work at the time. So this is it's in the 50s, okay? So still in the 50s, which was called Lighting Peace. And it's the piece that starts the exhibition. I mean, there's something before as you enter, like on the wall right as you enter, that you have to walk along on the left to go into the first room. But the first piece that we see as a video in video form is Lighting Piece, where she sat next to a piano and she would light matches and watch them burn. And so that's one of the first pieces as well, and it's one that starts the exhibition as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just gonna say, and I mean that piece in particular, it's video, it's performance, but it's also instruction. It's kind of one of her first instruction
Yes,
pieces.
yes,
Maybe I don't know if I have that totally right, if it's one of her first, but I mean, it's one of her early instructions, at least, and the instruction was light a match and watch it till it goes out. So it's something that she performed and videoed, but then also, wanted anybody who came along to perform on their own wherever. And then she performed it loads of times through her career, but it also included a concert of inaudible sounds and sounds that reach the sky and breaths. So she imagined a score, again, kind of linking back to music, going through all of this. And so she noted in this lighting piece, I wanted most things to be performed in the dark, therefore asking the audience to stretch their imaginations. So again, putting it all back on, excuse me, you, the attendee, for participation.
Thank you so much for talking about that because that's going to allow me to make a leap into 1962. So she eventually married Toshi Ichianagi, who's a famous composer, a Japanese composer. And all the works that she's preparing at Sarah Lawrence, including the one you mentioned, which is made of inaudible sounds because they're either too high pitched in some ways, or impossible to hear in terms of our morphology. And she performed in a very famous concert place that was supposed to be experimental already in 1962. So, one of the things that I think is really important to say is how incredibly advanced Japan was in terms of experimental art in all areas: visual arts, cinema, music, every poetry. I mean, the Gutai movement was being born at the time in another city in Japan. I mean, it was really, really intense. And therefore, this was received not as a sort of oddity, but people were waiting to see what she was going to do. And she went, so she was there after having been in New York with her husband performing that piece. And she was with John Cage. So she came to Japan also to accompany John Cage. They were quite close. After having had a period in New York where she started to know people in the art world, including George Masunas, who was the person who developed the Fluxus movement. And so she went to Japan, she performed that, and in the press, it was written that her work was derivative. That
Hmm.
concert you're talking about was derivative and was Cagean.
Huh.
And Toshi Ichianagi, who she was drifting away from, they were drifting away romantically, but they were very much close in terms of artistic endeavors and artistic sensibility, defended her. Basically, what the journalist was saying is that she was copying John Cage, which is really incredible because John Cage had been learning about Buddhism with Professor Suzuki in America. So if anyone was derivative, it
Yeah.
was the the
Ooh,
the American
scandal.
artists who were actually learning about Buddhism and incorporating Buddhist premises in their work. But she actually was raised in that. Well, her family was Catholic again. Like her family was so odd. Her family was Catholic, but she grew up in a Buddhist country, so obviously
Yeah.
she knew much more about anything, and she did incorporate Buddhists thought into her work. And so Ichanagi defended her and said that this had nothing to do with 433, which was 4 minutes 33 seconds in silence, thus validating all the other sounds that you can hear in the concert hall, so John Cage's piece.
Hmm.
Whereas with her, it was all about the sounds that reached the sky and other sounds that could not reach your ear. So she was producing sound. She was not making you listen to the sound of the room at all.
Yeah.
So they missed the point. And of course, they had to accuse the only woman
Yeah.
doing something in that concert hall, or one of the only women, as being derivative of
Yeah.
a
Totally.
Western artist, no
Yeah,
less.
exactly.
So,
And it's, I mean, you think of like how, what a big influence John Cage was, even on a lot of the artists we've talked about on this podcast, in terms of
yes,
Philip
yes,
Guston. I mean, even Daido Moriyama. I mean, but it's like they're, I mean, none of them were like, "Oh, you're just ripping off some other guy," even though they were kind of doing
of
things in a
course,
different format. But yeah, I know. This, I mean,
of
it's,
course.
I mean,
And of
can I
course,
just
she had to
say,
be accused.
yeah, it's like even way before John Lennon, she was getting in the neck, this woman for her
Oh,
art
all the
and the
time.
way she was going about it. And the
All the
fact that
time.
she is actually still going today is just a huge monument to her inner strength. I mean, so many people would have been like, "You know what? I don't know. Maybe it's just not worth it. Maybe I'll just have a quiet life, live it out here in the Dakota. I'm good." I mean, but yeah, she's just continuing, and that is really, yeah, impressive.
I mean, she started out her life unrecognized and uncelebrated by her parents, by her own family. And she went off just doing whatever she wanted to do. Because when she enrolled in philosophy class, she was very criticized when she wrote nonfiction. They would tell her it was too narrative. When she wrote fiction, they would tell her it was too much out of the bounds of what fiction writing was supposed to be. I mean, she never really felt at home. And I think Sarah Lawrence was probably the only place where she could really develop her creativity. But it was the same thing when she was in New York. So before going to Japan, she started. I'm not sure I'm getting this one right. Was it before or after? I think it was probably after this beginning of the 60s time period. So she went back to New York and she started welcoming people with her composer husband into their loft, and they would do these performances. She would do her paintings, her kind of like interactive or
Yeah,
quirky
throw jello at the
instructional. Yeah,
wall, you know,
throw
and
jello at the
then
wall.
start putting, like, Japanese characters and ink over it, and then lighting it on fire, and everybody was like, "Oh my god, we're gonna die," you know? But this is so the Chamber Street stuff, I think this is incredible, and I
Yeah.
think this just again goes to the heart of what she is. And when we came to the Chambers Street stuff in the exhibition, because I had no idea that she was just like throwing open the doors to these avant-garde artists in New York at that time. And maybe this was pre-factory. Could this have been pre-factory? I mean, I'm
It
not
was at the
really
same
sure.
time.
Maybe the same time, yeah.
It
But
was, yeah. But I
even
mean,
even
Factory was 1963, right? So it was kind of developing at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. But even still, as you say, for a woman to kind of be at the forefront of doing that is incredible. This is where I started to think of her differently because to be honest, it's like her work has never I've had a hard time relating to her work. But when because very cerebral and what is it you want me to do? And this doesn't feel like you're trying that hard. What are you producing here, Yoko Ono? You're producing an instruction for me to do something. Is this art? And I mean, I've had all of this
What
kind of
are you making?
what are you making? Exactly. What do you do? Are you performing? Perform for me. Come on. And I mean, so it's like I went to this exhibition in Minneapolis years and years ago, and I remember there was a room and it had some kind of like um, tuning fork in it, and it was like you just need to hit the tuning fork, and I just remember being like, I don't feel that. Like, what is this supposed to be? So anyway, so lots of cerebral kind of like overload, which I frankly get in a lot of exhibitions, especially with contemporary art. My brain goes into overdrive. And it's like, what is this? I don't get it. And the questions roll in, and I just have to let that sort of intellectual vomit just pass. I just need to let it out, let it go, and then I just need to and then I can kind of sit with whatever it is the artist wants me to sit with, and then maybe I can feel something.
I would call that an intellectual panic. I think conceptual arts really sets up the audience to first of all be very, very discombobulated and then go into a slight panic of what the hell is this?
Yeah,
What is this? What are you doing?
yeah.
Why do you want me to do something? What are you doing?
What's so great about this, I mean, and
Yeah.
so it's like but when I read about the Chambers Street stuff, I started to
So
think
Chamber
of
Street, just to explain for our listeners, is the loft that she shared with her composer husband, and where she started welcoming lots of people from John Cage, Philip Glass, Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, David Tudor, Terry Ryler, and very importantly, Lamonte Young, because they became quite close afterwards.
yeah, and so loads of avant-garde artists at the time to this loft to just explore art and
To
have
perform, to
performances.
just
Yeah.
explore art together. Can you imagine doing that nowadays? People will be like, "What are we? What are you doing?
I don't
Can
know,
we have a
you
dinner,
know more
please?
than
Like, are you
me.
doing the roasts?"
Yeah. Yeah,
What?
yeah, yeah. You know more than me, so this apparently doesn't happen anymore then. I mean, it must happen at art schools or something, right? I mean,
I think that we've come to a place in the art world that is very conservative, and it's getting harder and harder to um, convey conceptual practices and to get together around art. And that's how, not to plug it, I didn't create Drawing Now Art Fair. It wasn't my invention. Just work for them, and I really love Drawing Now because of that. Because you end up talking about drawing, and you see very passionate people really wanting to talk about the art, what they've seen in the gallery booths. The talks we do, the round tables, always end up with people meeting each other, going after for coffees to talk about what they're doing. And
mm,
it's becoming more and more rare to have that kind of event. And shout out to a very good friend who I haven't seen in a long, long time called Pierre Le Guillon. He's an amazing artist. And he did this thing called La Promesse de l'écran, the promise of the screen. And he would set up a screen. So there would be a screen where he would project, he would invite artists to propose videos. That's where Diogo did his first performance. So the screen for Diogo was the sheet of
oh,
paper that he folded,
yeah.
turned into a cube, and made his first cube performance.
Which you can see on
And
YouTube,
then
people. Do check it out. Diogo
Diogo
Pimentel.
Pimentel, plugging in my husband's work. We're a bit like Yoko Ono and John Lennon, basically.
Totally.
Um, totally. And so in the middle of so you'd have the screening or the performance or whatever, and then the screen would lift up, and there was a bar behind it.
Oh,
And so people would drink, but because they had just experienced something together, it was one of the first arts experiences I had where people were really talking about the work. And there was
huh.
such a bit, I'm not a very big small talker. So for me, it was like one of the happiest places. I experienced when I lived in Paris. This was around
Wow.
2006, 2007. It was so, so pleasant. But it's very rare, actually, because in the art world, everyone's anxious. They want to prove that they're doing something, that that they're progressing in the right direction, or they want you to go and see their exhibition. And so it's all about plugging stuff and not really talking about the art. And so in this time, I mean, of course, this was a phenomenon of the time as well. There was no social media, TV was crap. People would get together. People were out in the streets demonstrating. They were out in the streets fighting for civil rights. It was a time where people really got together, and
Yeah.
collectivity was a thing where you were building a better future in some way. So, of course, like Marina Abramovich, she was of her time for sure, but
Yeah.
she started really early on, and she did start the loft culture, which became so much of a thing for people like Laurie Anderson, Lou Reed, even The Factory. I mean, all of those, even the cliche that you now see in films of the 80s, where, you had an artist loft with neon sculptures all the time.
Yeah.
That came from there. She was the first one to do that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that
And
was
that was, I
quite
mean, just
impressive.
to link back to a point I started to make about 5 minutes ago, I feel like,
I am
she
so sorry, Emily.
no, 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 we wandered
That's what it's all
together.
about.
We wandered
Yes,
together.
we did.
I'm just mentioning it
Hand in
because I
hand.
actually remembered to link back to it. So
Well done,
bragging,
you.
basically.
Wow. Wow,
But,
I'm impressed.
yeah, thank you. Um, but it was through the chambers, through the loft stuff that made me see her as an event organizer. So it's like, in a
Mhm,
way, and it's like,
mhm,
so it's about
mhm.
the welcoming people into a space and just holding it really lightly just to see what happens, to see what unfolds. And
Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of, give a framing, but give up control,
Mm.
and and that's when I thought, basically, that's what I do in my job. I'm an event
Yeah.
organizer. So I'm
Yeah.
basically, and I have a husband that plays guitar. Same, same. We are the same.
Same.
Yeah.
Listen, it's us. We are
You are
reverberate. We're pursuing the tradition
exactly our
of
influence.
the power couple
Yeah, Yoko Ono has influenced us beyond our even consciousness until just now, which is
yeah,
amazing.
until
But
just now.
but I have to say, it's like, so the exhibition, just to jump to the exhibition for a second.
I was going to say, isn't that what the exhibition is?
Yeah.
But make your point.
So the exhibition, as you mentioned, before you actually get in there, there's the wish trees, which is something she's been doing for years. And it's trees that are indoors, and you can write a wish and hang it on the
Or
tree.
outdoors. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And
And it comes from a Buddhist tradition, guys. She really incorporates Buddhism into the works she did, like in
yeah,
and firsthand, not through Professor Suzuki, who was teaching everyone in back in the States, but like through her own culture. Sorry,
yeah,
and a
yeah.
friend.
No, for sure, because that comes up again in Cut Piece, which we'll talk about later on. Um, but so, but what I liked about that was, having your first experience of the exhibition be something so personal and collective. It puts yourself it like taps into your higher mind. It's like, oh, what is my wish? What's my great wish right now? And looking at the wishes, I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, they were just like written in all sorts of languages. And the ones that I could read in English, I mean, were high wishes, wishes for peace, wishes for freedom, wishes for dignity, and freedom for Palestine and peace in Ukraine, and all, kind of, they weren't like, I want to win the lottery. I want a new car. It wasn't, wishes for trivial kind of earthly things. It really, it helps people before they even go into the exhibition to be in a frame of mind that is much different than they would be if they just plunged into lighting piece initially. Like
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
it's like a filter. It's like she's sifting out your, kind of, normal everyday thoughts, and she's putting everybody into a place. And I think about that, I mean, on a much, much lower level, Joanna. I
Are we
mean,
talking about
I've
Jack White again?
no, no, we could, yeah, no, but on a much lower level, it's like I've thought
Oh,
about that with events that I've put together. It's like, posing a
oh, that's not a
question,
lower level.
but I mean, it's not an exhibition at the Tate, but like, opening with a question to get people into a frame of mind, to prime the mind for the conversation that is to come, so that they might be a little bit more open, or might be a little bit more expansive than they would be if they hadn't had that initial question. But yeah, I mean, I think
So you
that,
think her work is about you think her work is about togetherness?
yeah, definitely. I mean, she definitely has the collective, and she definitely has, her respect and belief in imagination is profound, and you get that the moment, that's the first thing you get in the exhibition is, what's
Hmm.
your wish,
Hmm.
what, like, imagine, and that, yeah, I mean, and that's certainly something that flows through with a lot of the
Hmm.
pieces. But I just think, artist and art comes with a lot of baggage, and in my mind there is that baggage. Like, what are you creating, what are you performing? Otherwise,
Hmm. What's your skill?
what's your
And what's your
skill?
skill? It's
Show it
it's a
to
lot
me.
about skill, and we interpret skill. I wrote a text a few years back about the idea of skill in drawing, and I shifted the attention from the skill of the line to the skill of framing whatever. line you were
Yeah.
doing, or someone else would be doing, like in Soloit, for example, where people would make his drawings, not him. And the idea of skill here is very interesting because the skill is not in a sort of a technical talent that you correlate with traditional technologies of art. It's somewhere else. And she really is, I agree with you. I mean, she says so herself. It's all about letting go. And she is bored with the art world. She's not interested in the art world. She is interested in giving the power for everyone to be an artist through the power of imagination. That's what she wants to do. She finds it extremely boring to deal with the egos of artists. And that's another Japanese thing that she's bringing in, which is a very different idea of the ego. And when you think about artists, immediately the ego of authorship is there. And she doesn't have that. And to your point, the lighting piece, so the first one that really kind of, I think, in some ways after the wish tree and after the sentence that she wrote in the beginning, and when you get into the room and you see lighting piece, it suddenly becomes uber conceptual. Suddenly you think, oh, what is this about?
Hmm.
This is something else. It's not something I can participate in. So there's a lot of text, and you read the text and you understand where she performed it first, when she thought of it, what this video is from, who made the video, because it's all about togetherness for her, and also the repetition of certain gestures, because the wish trees are very known. I've experienced them before. I'm sure you have as well.
Mm.
And so when you get there, I immediately thought of the scene, the very famous scene of Tarkovsky's film Nostalgia, where a character has to cross a cold pool of water holding a candle and not letting the flame go off, the
Hmm.
flame of the candle. And so it's a very potent scene that is a lot about faith. And I don't relate to Tarkovsky very much because it's very faith driven and religion driven. And that scene has always annoyed me. And
Hmm.
Diogo loves it. And I find it incredibly annoying. I find it excruciatingly, I don't want to say corny, because such a terrible word, but I have a hard time with it because it's all about you sweating, making an effort. It's so effort driven. It's not about faith to me. It's about, realizing where the draft is coming from, where, kind of protecting the candle, holding your body in cold water. It's a very male performative kind of thing. Whereas with her, what is so beautiful is she's just holding a match,
Hmm.
watching it burn. It takes time. And that's the time you're going to take to see that energy live its life, start really powerful, then gaining momentum, and then slowly fading away and dying out. And that's it. And she's by a piano. So obviously, the exhibition's called Music of the Mind. There's this idea of the score as well. Music takes time, it takes place in time, it's an action, and you feel an energy in it. And that's something that is irreducible, but also in some ways very personal, but at the same time collective. So she's saying a lot of things with that piece that I think probably was a bit discombobulating for those who arrived from the very immediate, like, I'm going to make a wish, and this is all about imagination. And suddenly she has quite a few conceptual pieces that are
Yeah.
not so accessible, like you were saying, in the exhibition. We will continue in the next episode to talk about Yoko Ono's incredible journey. We're still in
Okay.
the beginning of the 60s. So that's crazy. And we haven't
Yeah.
even talked about the paintings yet. We're still in 1962. And that's why we decided to turn this into two-part episode for the first time, because we really thought that this was an artist who deserves attention and not to be defined by one of the husbands she had in her life.
So, thank you so much for following on this exploration of the work of Yoko Ono, part one. We hope you enjoyed listening as we enjoyed recording this conversation. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Exhibitionistas Podcast and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. Follow the podcast. It means a lot, and it does make a huge difference, as everyone knows. Tell your friends, leave us comments and suggestions, and don't forget, we visit exhibitions so that you have to. Go out there, give your local gallery a visit. Why not? Stroll on in. It's not as scary as you might think it is. I have found that to be true. So it's always worth it, even if you don't like it. Read a bit about the artist, and let us know what you are seeing and hearing out there and what it's meaning to you. That would be fantastic. So until then, take care. All right.
Take care. Thank you for doing this with us. See you, Emily. Always so nice to chat with you.
And
Take
you.
care and get well soon.
And you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Will do. Will do.